Hey, so how's it, everybody? Welcome back to Freedom FANatics. I'm your host, Alex, and today I'm joined by one of my colleagues, Sholan and Sholan, welcome back to Freedom FANatics, where your freedom is worth fighting for. Remember, guys, you can find us at Badge of Liberty on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, as well as TikTok. I don't know if there's any platform that I've forgotten there, Sholan.
No, we basically on all platforms at this point. Yeah.
And when people say, "Oh, so, you can listen to your podcast wherever you find your podcast, wherever you find yourself in social media, we probably
Exactly.
there." So, Sholan, let's kick off today's show with a story that touches on one of our favorite topics, which is voting and your freedom to lead. And this is quite a concerning story that was ultimately highlighted by an organization called My Vote Counts. And the story came out of News 24, where the titled "Underfunding of IEC: A Threat to Democracy." After News 24 released a report that the IEC's budget had been cut by almost 770 million rand over the next 3 years. Now, obviously, My Vote Counts acknowledge that this doesn't happen in a void. Other budgets are being cut. Policing is being cut. All sorts of departments because South Africa is getting poorer. But what does this mean? So some of the implications of this are the following. So obviously, when you have less money, you can do a lot less cool stuff. But what they highlight this is what they highlight in the article. So firstly, there will not be a second weekend of voter registration for the 2024 provincial and national elections. Voter education and outreach will not be adequately funded. Implementation of the Electoral Amendment Act will be jeopardized. Additional staff will be appointed. And plans to introduce an e-voting pilot project towards ensuring elections are free and fair are now underfunded. So very concerning, cutting the sort of the heart of our democracy. Sholan, which one for you here is what stands out for you in this list, or just the issue at heart?
Yeah, no, for sure. One thing that definitely sticks out for me here is that the fact that voter education and outreach will not be adequately funded. I mean, we already see in South Africa that there's a decline in people, participating in our elections. Unfortunately, since democracy, it's been a consistent decline downwards. And I mean, now more than ever is when we actually need an overfunded IEC, I would say, because they have such a vital and crucial job in securing and making sure that everybody is able to have access and people are actually able to cast their votes, because voting is a cornerstone of democracy in general, and without it all else will most likely fail. Because I mean, in situations like in Zimbabwe, there's a situation where the ruling party have constantly been accused of rigging the elections in their favor, because no proper resources have been placed into their Electoral Commission. And I mean, if the IEC, which stands for the Independent Electoral Commission, wants to remain independent, it must be sustainably resourced. And I must also note, I'm no conspiracy theorists out in the streets, Alex, but I find it kind of sus that just when things are starting to get extremely tough for our ruling party, the ANC, that's when suddenly there's no longer any money to put into the Independent Electoral Commission. That's just a bit sus for me.
No, look, I definitely, I think there's some merit to that, but I do think that there's an element of that. Our economy is not growing. The ANC itself is running out of money, so it's kind of emblematic of that sort of stagnation. And the problem then is you don't have money to spend on things that need spending on. But then again, we've got a public service wage bill which is bloated, and comrades and cadres getting probably way more than they should, or there's too many of them that aren't contributing or adding value. And I think what we see here is, plans to introduce pilot project for e-voting. Innovation gets stymied. We can't do cool things.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if we actually wanted to, engage more digital and more electronic minded youth in this day and age, e-voting pilot project is exactly what we might need to maybe steer ahead. Obviously, if it's done in the proper manner. I mean, in the United States, even I'm just thinking when constantly every time they have their elections, I'm talking about the United States. You know, they have a lot of funding behind the voting, and still there is accusations of election rigging and funds, and somebody maybe having hacking into their electronic voting systems. I'm like, can you imagine in South Africa the risk that poses here if something that needs supreme and ultimate cybersecurity, there's not enough money to do it. And then you know what the joke is? That tender might possibly go to a ANC cadre that obviously doesn't really care about how well the job's done anyway. So
yeah, exactly. I think one thing we must outline here is that it is part of our mission at FAN to ensure that we get as many people to vote as possible. So when it comes to voter education outreach, we'll be putting our money where our mouth is and leading a campaign to get people to register and ultimately vote in 2024. It's basically 2 years until we head back to the polls. So also, if there's anything that we can do as people to go, we cover Sholan stories all the time of communities stepping in where the government is failing. This is another example, but what you can do is think why you go to the polls, look at a friend, ask a friend if they've registered, if they voted in the last election. Ask them if there's one thing that they could vote for, what would it be? And if you can get them to register and get them to vote, we can do the work of the government where they are failing. So, all is not lost. And it's ultimately, like with a lot of other things, including service delivery in South Africa, it's up to you and me. But moving swiftly along to a story that, what would a week be without a race story in South Africa? And Sholan, you brought this to my attention yesterday. And this none other than the race squabble that is going on at Stellenbosch University, Sholan's alma mater. I'm trying to think where to start here. So, Sholan, let me just start sharing our platform here. But I'm gonna give you the floor first to just give us some background as to about the story.
Yeah,
what actually happened?
Yeah, so early yesterday, which was probably like the 16th of May, it actually came on. This viral video actually was released, and people. What actually occurred was that one of the students in one of Stellenbosch's prominent male residences, stated that one was a black first year student who stated that a white student or a group of them entered his room and they just started urinating all over his room in his residence. And when he essentially asked them, like, why are you guys doing this? What's the point of you doing this in the early hours of the morning while you guys are drunk? And it's been reported, at least, that what the response was that, oh no, this is what we do with black boys here in Stellenbosch, supposedly. And the incident, it caused a complete uproar, which I think is rightly so. Because
you're on campus at the moment, right? What are the kind of things that you've personally seen?
Yeah, so what's actually happening is that there's been constant protests on our university campus. A lot of people are calling for the students' expulsion. They want him to actually be expelled from this institution. Although, like, the management of the university has claimed that, okay, no, they have suspended him in the meantime, following a proper investigation from the university. But many people are, they going to like the university's head offices, complaining, protesting, saying like more needs to be done regarding this instance, and that it should, and that this guy should be used as an example that racism is not tolerated in this institution as a whole, whether it's staff or new students. That is something that the university should not tolerate, and a clear message should be sent that this type of behavior can lead to you actually being expelled if you are partaking in it. Yeah.
Okay, so Sholan, I'm gonna just flight the video for a moment, and then I'm gonna just respond to what you've said. So let's have a look at the video.
Why are you peeing in my room?
Huh?
Why are you peeing in my room, bro?
Waiting for someone.
Huh?
Oi.
What, bro?
Waiting for room, man.
What?
Okay.
Why are you peeing
So
in my
pretty wild. I think, Sholan, what's worth noting here is that, you know, we are often very skeptical when it comes to race hustling in South Africa.
Yeah.
And I think what's important here is when racism does occur, you call it out. And I think this is certainly something like that. I mean, you're a resident at Stellenbosch. If your bed sheets were doused in urine, I don't think you'd be all that chuffed. So I think it's worth acknowledging what it is. But I think what's also important here is that, you know, the boys apologized. There's videos emerged of at some sort of hearing where the boy has apologized for his actions. He's clearly drunk, and the victim has denied, is not laying criminal charges. So I think there's certainly an element here where, for me, where processes kind of need to be followed. Outrage, I think, is unfortunately, I think it's justified. But I think it's also, you know, things need to go through the various processes, and also behind closed doors, if these guys can sort out between themselves and come to some agreement, I think there should be some sort of disciplinary action. Then I think that's probably at least a good first step. I don't know, what are your thoughts on the sort of ramifications of disciplinary process?
Yeah, no, for sure, I agree with you. I do think that, you know what, a process, there needs to be a legitimate process where these things are consistently being held with. Because, I mean, you can't have one response for this guy, another response for if another incident occurs. There needs to be a consistent line and procedure that takes place when it comes to disciplining these people. You know, it's essentially, I would basically like say it, the rule of law. If we're going to, you know, if we're going to call for things like equality, this is where it should start. There should be an equal amount of attention given to this, and it shouldn't just be from, you know, like mob justice where everybody's screaming off with the head of this guy, whatever the case may be. That's not actually how we deal with stuff in a civilized country and in a civilized institution. There needs to be a proper procedure for sure. And I even think, in this case, I even think that he should be expelled. I don't think suspension is enough, but yeah, in this specific context, that's definitely my view on it.
Yeah, I think the fact that, you know, due process needs to be applied here is an important aspect, and I think it can get tricky in universities where, you know, ordinarily people vomiting and weeing on each other isn't the most outrageous thing, but obviously context in this is important, and I think basically the law needs to be applied equally, and I think that's important. Otherwise, when racism, that's the thing, so that when racism does occur, we can deal with it appropriately, as in this instance. I was going to talk about SASCO's statement, but I think let's save that for another day. Let's rather, Sholan, move. Is there anything else you want to add before we move on to our next little item for today?
No, that was all I was actually I wanted to say. Other than also my only concern is that, like, as you say, we need to call out these racist actions when they do occur. And because what we see, especially in our social media age, is that there tends to be a lot of false and fake claims made against people, you know, in an attempt to destroy people's careers, but when things like these actually happen and it's blatant and extremely clear, as in this case, it needs to be called out absolutely. And one of my concerns was this, like I always tell you, Alex, I don't look for racism under every rock and behind every dark cupboard or whatever the case may be. But my concern with this was really how many times has this actually occurred and the public was never made aware of it. And that's something I really took into consideration, because not many people would have been courageous enough to have spoken up and to be like, yo, I'm actually a victim in this regard, and it's actually real. So
yeah. And I mean, it's a pretty disgusting thing to do, nonetheless. So either way, you would expect some sort of disciplinary procedure. But yeah, let's see what happens. Obviously, SASCO and the EFF, I'm sure, are leading the charge on campus. I'm not sure if you've seen anything around the sort of the political actors on campus before we move on.
Yeah, no, for sure. Many of the protests and so forth and actions on social media all over has been by the EFF guys, the student organizations, and SASCO as well. And one of my concerns is that they are going to take this and run with it as a political motive behind it. As we usually saw, even with this fees must fall situation, where there's a lot of these young youth trying to be political activists and secure their eventual jobs. They're taking a run away with it and diluting the actual racist incident that was taking place in this scenario. And that is just my fear, that they do not shy away attention from it to complete some EFF agenda somewhere. So
No, for sure. I mean, also always what I think we should keep a keen eye on is where the individuals in the story are involved. So it is an incident that happened between these two parties, and now with the disciplinary procedure, that's kind of where one's attention should be focused to avoid it being weaponized unduly. But that onus is on you and me and people watching this to keep our wits about us and always be critical. Sholan, let's. Unfortunately, Theo couldn't join us today, but he flagged a story that is slightly different to something that we usually speak about, and this is about the impact of the mental health state, rather, of South Africans, and particularly our youth. So I'm going to flag this video, which comes out of Tembisa, and then let's just chat about it very briefly.
Ghostwriter, Wednesday evening, white man living in Tembisa. This is a message which I hope will be very important to some people out there. One of my modules that I'm doing in my master's year 5, has to do with suicide and depression. The South African Depression and Anxiety Group, SADAC, their statistics show that 23 people commit suicide every day in South Africa, and 230 people attempt but fail to commit suicide every day in South Africa. Since COVID started, the figure of calls that the SADAC call center must manage on a daily basis has jumped from 600 to 2,200. It's rough out there. People have lost houses, jobs, husbands, wives. It really is rough out there. So you never know what's going through the mind of a person that you know, or a person sitting next to you at work. So don't give up. Encourage people. The sun will always shine again tomorrow, and abide by the principle that tomorrow will always be greater than today. Have a good evening. I hope that message helps someone out there.
All right, some feel-good motivation there, Sholan. Obviously, something that is often glossed over is mental health. I mean, especially in a country where the physical realities for so many are so difficult, we tend to gloss over the state of people's well-being and mental health. So, when we look at, where do we start? People are in debt. The value of the purchasing power of your basic salary is diminishing, and 75% of young people in South Africa are unemployed. So yeah, it's a bit of a tough one, but I think it's important to highlight that psychologically our people are taking a bit of a bashing at the moment.
No, for sure. The one thing I really appreciate about this video is that, it shows that mental health really doesn't discriminate based on race or socioeconomic status. None of those things matter because that's why I think it should even be such a unifying issue for all of us. And it also goes to show, as you mentioned in the clip, like people losing jobs, incomes, the houses, homes. That actually goes to show that a productive economic activity essentially goes beyond any financial transaction that you could possibly have. Because I mean, people being able to bring in money to support the family, it extends to being an issue regarding dignity that people have, being able to break poverty, generational poverty, and that's why it should really be concerning for the government or the state that when you stop people from doing this, you not only stop them from being able to put food in their mouth, but it's also restricting their willpower and their outlook on life and the freedom that they are able to live out of. So yeah, it extends way beyond economic activity, extends way beyond just being a financial transaction.
Exactly, and we've often spoken about it, and especially our dear friend from the Center for Risk Analysis, Becky Mihlobo, often cites that healthier economies, better performing economies have happier, quite literally, populations. Now, obviously, that's not to say that people with money don't are necessarily more happy in their personal lives, but certainly their basics in their concerns are a lot different to those without jobs or incomes or struggling families. So I think it's just something to bear in mind, and that goes to the root of why at FAN we advocate for an accountable and limited government that ultimately emboldens you and allows you to have the freedom to earn, the freedom to learn, the freedom to play, which can ultimately be achieved by voting at the ballot box and using your freedom to lead. So that's just something worth bearing in mind, guys. Our last little thing that we want to point out is just a little bit of some developments here at FAN. Our campaigns team has been very busy behind the scenes, running some campaigns, and this relates to your freedom to play. And we have started tackling racial discrimination in sport. And our latest press release that went out, I think this morning actually, is demanding clarity from SASCOC, from the South African Sports Confederation Olympic Committee, to see clarity on the sporting governing body's stance on non-racialism, so that we've sent requests in terms of the Promotion of Access and Information Act, which aims to foster a culture of transparency and accountability. And we just want to know what their race-based policies are. And if there are racialized policies, we want to know how they are determined and why they exist. So just something worth keeping an eye out for. And we'll obviously keep you guys in the know here on Freedom FANatics and at www.freedomadvocacy.net. So I think, Sholan, let's wrap it up there for today. I think we've got some interesting stuff lined up in burning questions. So yeah, let us jump straight into that right now.
Hey guys, hey everyone, welcome to this week's Burning Questions. Myself and Alex have an exciting show ahead. So I think we can get straight into it, Alex. So today's quote of the week that we have highlighted and has been performing well on our social media platforms is a quote card by Milton Friedman, who is an American economist. And Milton Friedman essentially says, we need a government to ensure the safety of its citizens, to provide police protection, but unfortunately, government is failing in this regard. And Alex, do you have any thoughts? I know that Milton Friedman speaks in a very American context, but are there some similarities that we actually see happening in South Africa right now with this quote card as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I can't exactly remember when this quote was made, but he was speaking to an American context. Places like New York used to suffer from immense levels of crime in the 1980s, 1970s, 1980s, and they cleaned up their act to a large degree. That's one of the ultimate functions of the state is to keep its citizens safe. And when I think there was news just yesterday, Sholan, that you were chatting to some colleagues on the Daily Friend show about there's been 442 mass killings in the Western Cape in the last 18 months, which I think extrapolates to over 500 people. And we know how bad murder rates are, how gender-based violence in South Africa, and unfortunately, your freedom is so severely limited when you don't feel safe enough to walk the streets. And to trade, to do business, when your property is not protected, when you have threat of your home being invaded. So I think we don't need to tell anyone at home how bad things are, but it's certainly something that we need to address, and I'm sure people in the comments did that as well.
Yeah, speaking of people in the comments, one thing that we also just want to flag is some of the comments and responses that we actually received regarding fans' quote cards, because I mean, fans' quote cards tend to generate a lot of engagement on our social media platforms, and people have a lot to say. And one of our comments is by Savas Nathaniel. And he essentially asked us, like, what government are we supposed to be referring to? Because we have a mafia organization running this country. And I mean, we have a lot. I mean, the ANC is a lot of things. But is it maybe a stretch that we extending to calling it a mafia organization or a criminal syndicate? Because I know, Alex, there was always reports like coming from places like the KZN, KwaZulu-Natal, where there's actually cases where ANC members and the ruling party members actually like assassinate one another. There's political assassination is quite the thing, and because people want different positions and so forth. But do you think calling the ANC a mafia organization is a step too far, or is it maybe a very good description of the organization?
You know what? I actually want to give Savas credit. I think it's not so far-fetched. If you even look, like our deputy president is embroiled in some scandals in Mpumalanga with some game farms over there. As you mentioned, political killings in KZN is a massive problem. Speak about safety and security issues. It even affects the governing party itself. Obviously, former President Jacob Zuma is embroiled in stuff. There was the arms deal, state capture. Then you've got the Estina dairy farm in Free State with Ace Makashule. You've got the asbestos case. So, I don't think it's that far-fetched. And I think what Savas touches on is that, they're running the show to enrich themselves, which ultimately, I think they are. The ANC, the government, the governing party. So I think he's onto something there. We've just lost your volume, Sholan.
Oh, sorry. So another thing I was going to mention was that, so another one of our comments actually touched on the fact that, it's not enough that we expect the government to come and save us. But this comment is actually from Mark Stephen. And he essentially says that, we are supposedly out of touch. And the thing is that we don't need more, we need to be armed against what this quote supposedly advocates for, because the police are defunct. And I mean, in South Africa, our police is in a terrible state, and I think that's the reason why we see so much more private security in the country. But one thing I think we actually never spoke about it, Alex, and I actually wanted to also get your views on this. Do you think that, you know, gun rights in South Africa for ordinary citizens is actually a necessary thing? You know, should if things are already so chaotic in the country with crime and so forth, should we be arming citizens with more weapons in a legal manner, of course?
Yeah, I think, like, you know, we spoke about in Freedom FANatics, Sholan, about you know, keeping like law and order, or rather the rule of law in place. You know, you've got to abide by the rules, and I think the big problem in South Africa is illegal firearms, particularly being sort of let loose by police officers. And I think citizens having the freedom to arm themselves is incredibly important. And the problem with when the state starts to become as dysfunctional as it seems to be heading, is that you struggle to regulate things such as firearms. And I know a lot of, well, not personally, but I know of stories of people who firearms owners are generally quite responsible people that want to abide by the law. I think most South Africans do want to abide by the law, but when your institutions fall apart around you, you know, and your leaders don't lead by example, then it makes it incredibly difficult to get people to play by the rules.
Yeah, and I know from one of the gun rights activists on social media, specifically Gideon Joubert, one of the things he always highlights is that the process to actually own a firearm and be able to protect yourself is quite it's a very complex and complicated one. So if you actually do get your firearm license, I kind of think you must probably be somebody that can be trusted, because I know that SAPS tends to do over and above background checks. You know, make sure all the procedures, all your documentation is in order. So yeah, I definitely hear your point.
I think, Sholan, it also goes to say it speaks to other elements of service delivery and dealing with bureaucracy. You know, how difficult, maybe where you're based in Cape Town, it's a little bit easier, but, you know, getting a driver's license, renewing your driver's license, renewing your car license disc. You know, anyone who's been to Home Affairs in the last 5 to 10 years will know no one looks forward to it. So if we made these processes a lot easier, a lot more people would make the effort to make sure that they're above board and following due process.
Yeah, absolutely. Alex, thank you for sharing your views with us on this burning episode, questions episode. And to our viewers, you can engage, you can go leave comments that we are able to read on our podcast episodes. Go and do it at Badge of Liberty, Freedom Advocacy Network on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you on social media, go and get us there and definitely engage with our content, and, you know, leave us your thoughts, and we will definitely be sure to read up on it and engage with it as best as possible. But thank you guys for joining this week's episode of Burning Questions. We will see you guys next week, and yeah, have a good week. So see you guys.